adoption of the agenda. Someone want to make that motion for me, please? Councillor Elliott, seconded by Councillor Charlotte. All in favor? Motion's carried. Moving on to adoption of the minutes, special council minutes of April 30th. Does someone want to put that on and approve it, please? Councillor Charlotte, seconder, Councillor Juncker. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Any business arising from the minutes of April 30th? Seeing none, we're going to go right into our development services presentation. Mr. Simon, you're going to do a presentation, so I understand it's going to take a minute or two to get you up and running, but you go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just give me a second here to share the screen with everyone. So if there's any issues at all while I'm going through the presentation in terms of being able to see everything, just please let me know and we will get things sorted out. So thank you, Your Worship. To begin here, the first item we have is a development variance permit and development permit application for a single-story commercial building. So to kind of give a brief overview of the presentation, we're going to start with some background information, followed by an overview of the development proposal. Within this, we're going to break down the components of the development variance permit and then the development permit application. We're going to move on to the policy direction that outlines the overview of staff's evaluation and conclude with the staff recommendation on how to move forward. So to give some background on this project, it's located at 415 2nd Street West. The property is approximately 0.23 acres in size, so just under 1,000 square meters. It falls within the downtown revitalization development permit area. It's zone C2, which is the downtown fringe commercial district. And as you can see on the photos here, it is surrounded by both residential as well as commercially zoned properties. There is one existing building on site, which you can see from the aerial. And it is currently used for retail purposes with a stockroom. So this application, because it is a development variance permit, was required to be sent out to landowners within 100 meters of the subject land. So it was circulated to 73 adjacent landowners. Staff did receive, up until this meeting, 14 letters in opposition to the requested variances, as well as 3 letters in support of the variances. These should be available for council review. There is also letters from the owner and their agent outlining the rationale and why they see council should support the variances.
Okay, just while you're there, Mr. Simon, I'm just going to stop. I have received 2 phone calls since noon today. Two people have basically rescinded their letters, so I just wanted council to be aware of that. I'll just make that statement and let you carry on. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Could I ask a question though on the letters? Were they a form letter or were they original letters, each one unique?
Most of what I saw, Councillor Elliott, were form letters. Sorry, Mr. Simon.
No problem. Thank you, Your Worship. So moving into kind of an overview of the proposed development. Again, it is for a single-story commercial building. So as such, it does need a development permit to look at form, character, and siting of the building. It's located adjacent to an existing commercial building. You can see that in the slide here. The applicant has requested a variance for both parking, loading, and a rear yard setback. And they are going to be required to enter into an agreement with the city with respect to the canopy that will be encroaching over 2nd Street West. So starting off with an overview of the development variance permit. So what they're asking for is a reduction of the rear yard setback from 3 meters to 1 meter. You can see this in the diagram here. This is specifically for the support wall for a covered canopy to provide coverage for the parking. So again, the canopy is allowed to encroach, but the support structure for that canopy cover is not allowed to encroach. And as such, a variance is required to that rear yard setback requirement. The applicant has also requested a variance for the total loading stalls. So 1 loading stall is required. They've requested a variance to 0. And then lastly, they've requested a variance for overall parking requirements from 14 stalls to 9. And we'll go into each one of those now. So with respect to the rear yard setback variance, you can see it highlighted in the picture here, exactly where we're talking about. Again, the zoning bylaw allows the canopy to encroach, it's covered canopy, but it doesn't allow the support structures for that canopy to encroach. We did get comments from BC Hydro, I will note, that says the applicant will need to work with them to ensure that impacts on existing infrastructure are mitigated. Staff will make sure that this is dealt with prior to any issuance of a building permit. And then staff are in support of the variance because this is required in accordance with the BC Building Code requirements, because there is a 0-meter side yard, and as such, they are needed to provide coverage for the canopy or for the parking, which staff do support. So with respect to the loading reduction, staff do support the reduction of loading stalls from one loading stall required to 0. This is because for this type of use, for the service commercial style development that we're seeing, generally loading stall requirements are minimized. There's not really a huge need for it. The OCP does identify laneways as typically being used for deliveries within this area of the city. And then also the streets within the central business district are generally wide enough that do allow for loading. So staff do support the loading variance. Now moving into the parking variance, we got to break this one down a little bit. So when we look at the requirements of the zoning bylaw, we need a total of 14 parking stalls, which equals 1 per 50 square meters of gross floor area of commercial space. What we get is a requirement for 13.1 spaces. The requirements of the zoning bylaw do require this to be rounded up. The parking is proposed to be shared between the existing building on site and the new building. So the 14 stall requirement does account for both buildings, and this is because the lands are not subdivided. So staff support a variance to reduce the requirements from 14 stalls to 13. And this is because it is quite a minor fractional requirement. And when we do look at best practice, usually most municipalities will look at a 0.5 requirement, determining whether or not to round up or down. There is an existing building on site with parking, and the OCP policies do highlight the need within this neighborhood to ultimately develop a parking management strategy. Therefore, staff are supportive of reducing the requirements from 14 to 13. Now, when we start to look at the total parking requirements, even though staff support that variance of 1 stall, we still have 4 deficient parking spaces that need to be addressed. When we look at the zoning bylaw requirements, there are provisions in section 12.5 that do provide guidance for staff and council when we are considering these types of applications. So one of the options as per 12.5 is to allow the owner to pay cash in lieu. For the required 4 spaces, this would equal about $81,600. And this is in accordance with the fees and charges bylaw requirements. And this would have to be paid prior to building permit issuance. So that's one option for council to consider. Within 12.5, it also allows commercial parking to be secured within 300 meters of the site. Again, this would be secured through a covenant, and that would have to happen prior to building permit issuance. And then council, in their discretion, they can deem it appropriate to just vary the 4 stalls for a total of 5 stall variance without requiring one of those 2 options, being cash in lieu or securing parking through a covenant. In accordance with the zoning bylaw, staff do support requiring cash in lieu and or a parking covenant for the 4 deficient stalls, and the resolutions that we put forward to you today, as well as the draft development variance permit and development permit, do reflect this recommendation. So that was the development variance permit. Now to quickly go through the development permit. Again, it's for form, character, and siting of commercial building. So the project does include natural red brick exterior finishes that are reflective of the historic downtown buildings. There are concrete exterior finishes along the sides and the rear, black aluminum windows and doors, black pre-finished metal flashing and trim, as well as, again, that projecting canopy to provide pedestrian coverage. And again, that is going to require the owner to enter into an encroachment agreement with the city, and we do have resolutions crafted to that effect. When we look at the overall site, it includes landscaping around the existing building. You can see here kind of along the northwest side, there is some bicycle parking as well. There is going to be rear covered parking with access to the laneway. So when we look at the policy direction for these types of applications, it is found within the official community plan, and it does speak to the guidelines that we evaluate the development permit against. So for form and character, staff have determined that the finishes are sympathetic to the heritage elements of the downtown commercial buildings. Again, as well, the height of the building in an area that hasn't experienced significant redevelopment yet is sympathetic when you are looking at its impact on the adjacent properties. When we look at surrounding uses, the properties are zoned residential and commercial, so this does fit in nicely into that area, and it is deemed to be complementary. When you look at site design, again, there's landscaping on site, and then there you can see here there is some existing landscaping within the city right-of-way as well. Parking and screening also is required in accordance with the development permit area guidelines. It's dedicated at the rear of the building adjacent to the laneway. Staff don't see any impact to garbage and recycling that's available in the laneway as a result of this application. And then lastly, we're required to look at signage, which would require a sign permit for any future development. So to conclude and to wrap things up here, staff, with respect to the variance, staff's recommendation is that we do support a variance from 14 to 13, with those 4 remaining stalls to be provided through cash in lieu and or secured through a parking covenant. Staff are supportive of the loading stall reduction from 1 to 0, and staff are also supportive of the rear yard setback being varied from 3 meters to 1 meter, specifically for the support feature for the canopy covered parking. Staff also are supportive of the owner entering into an encroachment agreement with the city to allow that canopy to project over on 2nd Street West. And then lastly, staff are supportive of approval of the development permit for form and character. It would be subject to a precondition of the owner providing a letter of intent that would relate to providing cash in lieu of the required parking spaces or secural of a covenant prior to building permit issuance. Thank you. This concludes my presentation.
Great, thank you, Mr. Simon. Councilors, before we ask questions, I would like to put the first motion on the table, A through C, if someone would do that, and then we can ask Mr. Simon questions. Councilor Juncker?
Yeah, Your Worship, seeing as it's pretty long, but we're online, did you want me to read the full thing still?
I think if we could, yeah, that would be good because we are online.
Okay, that development variance permit DVP 2020-01 located at 415 2nd Street West, parcel B, KM 17097, block 8, section 34, township 23, range 2, west of the 6th meridian, Kootenay District Plan 636, be approved for the following variances to zoning bylaw number 1264. A, section 8.2.5, bracket 1, setback requirements, reduction of the minimum rear yard setback from 3 meters to 1 meter. B, section 12.4, C and A, parking requirements, reduction of the minimum required parking spaces from 14 to 13. And C, section 13.3, bracket A, loading requirements, reduction of required loading spaces from 1 to 0.
Great. Is there a seconder for that motion, please? Councilor Charlotte. Now, councilors, do you have any questions of Mr. Simon? Councilor Juncker?
Yeah, Your Worship, thank you. And thanks, Mr. Simon, for the excellent presentation. And it's nice to see development services rolling again on council. So that's awesome. Just a couple things. I'm in support of this project. I think it's a terrific infill. I'm thoroughly impressed with the actual architecture and the look of the building. It fits right in. So kudos to the developer for actually taking the time to do that and not just putting in a, block and stick building into that spot. Kind of touching base with what the mayor indicated earlier. I've heard from several people in that area today, as well as the developer, that it seemed like some people were confused rather about this specific project. My understanding from hearing from some of them was that they were unaware exactly what the building was that was going in, as it's not listed as the veterinarian clinic. And my understanding or impression is it's not listed yet, as that usage doesn't match up with the C2 zoning. So reading through the comments from the neighbors, as well as hearing from some of them today that changed their minds and whatnot, as well as reading from the veterinarian. My only concern, well, a couple things, is I think this is clear that we need to redo the parking strategy bylaw, or whatever it needs to be called, as I think the requirement for 14 stalls for this type of a 1-floor commercial building seems absolutely crazy to me, and I would like to see more flexibility down the road in lieu of biking stalls, that kind of thing, as I think we should be trying as a city to move away from requiring such heavy parking. So my only thing is, I think that Your Worship, I wouldn't support the cash in lieu here, and I think we should be amending Part B, the parking requirements, just from the 14 just down to the 9. I think that would be suffice, but other than that, I support the project.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Appreciate that.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say, once everybody speaks, I would be happy to make that amendment from 14 to 9.
Okay, so we'll hear from everyone else. I just want to basically state that the proponents reached out to me and would like it to remain at 9 as well. I'm supportive of this sort of development. I am concerned about parking and how we move forward, so we want to have that discussion today. The one thing that we need to be aware of is that the cash in lieu for these parking spaces would go into a parking management plan so that we may be able to build something off-site or on a city piece of property somewhere else so that we can actually address parking. And I just want that to be noted because there are some concerns as to how we approach. There are concerns from some of the neighbors about parking, even though there is going to be parking in front of their places as well. So just so people are aware. And I just want to hear what other councillors have to say on this. So anyone else would like to speak? Councillor Ryan.
Thanks. Yeah, my first question is, in the report, it mentions that the property doesn't fall within any identifiable hazard areas that would inhibit future development. And I'm curious if that means that in the future, would that allow them to build vertically to add stories to this building, and what that would mean for parking? And like, I guess that would be its own little process, but I'm just
So
curious.
at this point in time, we're just dealing with what's on motion number 1. But Mr. Simon, I'm just going to allow you to ask that question. There's always problems about adding onto a building unless it was planned to be added onto when we talk about vertical. Is that correct?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. So what we have in front of us today is a proposal for 1 story. Should the applicant wish to amend or pursue a different development proposal at some point in the future, staff would reevaluate it against the required amount of parking as per the zoning bylaw. But what we have before us today is the single-story building. And if the applicant did choose to redevelop in the future, we would reevaluate and then bring it back for council consideration.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. I have another question. I'm more just curious about why the building was designed this way with not enough parking spaces. I mean, I understand the reasoning and the justification for reducing the parking requirements, but when these kinds of development comes forward, what are they going off of in terms of the guidelines? Where are the architects getting the information before they build the building?
Mr. Simon?
Through Your Worship. Yep, so it's really something that's at the discretion of an applicant when they are putting together their application. Staff are evaluating it against the requirements of the zoning bylaw. This is what the applicant felt the site could support. I know in discussions with them, they said if they didn't have the covered parking, there was the potential to add 1 additional space. You know, staff also do look at this when we're doing comprehensive planning. So something that would be done through a parking management strategy, for instance. You look at what the highest and best use of the land is. And generally when developers are looking to submit applications and their architects are working with them, parking is not generally deemed to be the highest and best use of land. So I guess that's the best answer I'd be able to give, trying to speak for the applicant.
That makes sense. So I guess they would have to redo everything to allow for the 13 or 14 spots, right? Like at this point, they've designed a building already.
Yep, they could go back to the drawing board, and if we deemed that they needed to have 14 parking spots or 13 on this, they would have to go back to the drawing board, reduce their building size and increase their parking size.
Right.
Is that correct, Mr. Simon?
To Your Worship, yes, that is correct. And there is an option in the staff report, should council not support the variance, that would require the applicant to go and do just that, amend the proposal to comply with the zoning bylaw provisions.
That answer your question, Councillor Ryan?
It does. I have a couple more, but I'm happy to let other councillors speak if they have
Councillor
other
Charlotte?
questions.
Yeah, I'll chime in on this. I also support varying down to 9 parking spots. I think realistically that'll probably suit this building nicely. I am curious, looking at the letter there from the veterinary clinic, I was under the impression this was going to be 2 retail spaces in this building. Is that correct? Is the vet going to be one of those 2 spaces, or are they going to be the entire building?
Entire building.
Okay, then yeah, I'm definitely very comfortable with varying the parking. Because this does go with the zoning, and I do appreciate the need for us to move forward with a parking strategy going forward. I don't know how comfortable I am about changing the cash in lieu, like Councillor Juncker is talking about, but I'm happy to have that discussion. I'm wondering, I don't know that I really want to go down this rabbit hole too far, but I am curious. I was taking some looks around, trying to find what is the going number of parking stalls per square footage in communities like ours. I remember this conversation coming up back when the Tantrum building was being approved. I know our city is a little bit different, but I also know that this area is struggling with the parking realities.
Yes, and so Ms. Wade or Mr. Simon, do you want to weigh in on that? I'm just going to make a statement because when we dealt with the building, the other building that you were talking about on previous council, Ms. Charlotte, there was some cash in lieu for parking on that building. We talk about moving forward with a parking strategy. So if we don't fund a parking strategy, whether it's through this or other applicants, then we're deficient in making sure we have resources to deal with parking as an issue. I get where you're coming from as far as, this is suitable. I look at what the current vet clinic has. They have a huge parking lot. Rarely is that used. So they're just going around outside the perimeter of the building and it seems to be sufficient. However, they're at half the space there for their thing. Having said that, let's look at this development in itself. So if you as a council want to talk about the parking and reduction or going with what the proponent wants, the proponent's made it very clear to me, he doesn't want to have to pay for any more than 9. But staff are saying to us, if we don't start somewhere to put some funds aside for parking, then we're never going to be sufficient in dealing with those things. So I just want you to be aware of that. Any other council? Councillor Rind and then Councillor Juncker.
I just want to comment that I think it's important to note that even though maybe the veterinary clinic won't need all that parking, we don't know what tenant is going to move in there after who would still fit in that zoning, who may require more parking. So I don't think it's enough to just have the short-sightedness of one tenant or owner and use, because that could vary. And so I just want to make sure that that's something we consider. I'm also curious about that cash in lieu, because it mentions in the report it can be used towards alternative transportation solutions. What kind of, what would be an example of that? I just have a hard time understanding it.
Ms. Wade, if you'd weigh in, please. Unmute.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to weigh in a bit on the cash in lieu. One of the reasons why staff is recommending cash in lieu is that in our OCP, we have a policy that is requiring us to contribute to a parking management strategy. That parking management strategy has not been done yet. The funds that are in the municipal reserve for this will contribute to it. And in that plan, we would identify capital projects like a parking structure, alternative transportation avenues like end of trip, looking at other areas that we might secure for parking lots or structures. And right now, because we don't have enough money in that fund to actually support capital projects, that is why staff is recommending that there's a contribution towards the cash in lieu as per the zoning bylaw, and which we only have for C1 and C2 land uses. So that's how we would move forward. Historically, there has been waiving of the requirement for parking, and some of those buildings are putting pressure on the current area downtown. And what we are trying to do is highlight decisions for council to consider so that we can move in a direction that we can apply the municipal reserve funds for parking towards a plan and the building of those structures and having money so that if there was any partnership programs to come up with, we could have those funds to contribute in as well.
Great, thank you. Councillor Rind, you want to have a follow-up on this?
Yes, I do.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah,
Then
so
I'll get to Councillor Juncker.
yeah, that's great. So right now, we don't have enough money to sort of do any capital projects like you mentioned, but is would we get enough money from a few developments to be able to update our bylaw, or is that not a use that we can use it towards?
We can't use it for updating the OCP or the whole zoning bylaw, but part of it is that in particular to parking, it is one of the requirements in our OCP that we use that money to actually amend our zoning bylaw to have a more clear way of implementing parking strategies and for how we would vary parking moving forward by having a walkability strategy. We have a plan that informs the decisions as we made forward. Right now, we don't have those things.
Okay.
That answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I have a hard time with this one because I'm not sure where we're at with getting that parking management strategy. So, you know, is this a short term? Is this the kind of question and development that we're going to be proposed with several times and have to make these variances for? Like, or is this, you know, going to be resolved soon? Because that impacts my decision on this application.
Okay, well, at this point in time, Ms. Wade, you want to weigh in on that, please?
Thank you, Your Worship. The parking strategy plan has been identified in the work plan for development services. It is something that when we went through the budget, it was one of those priorities that didn't take as much precedence on some of the other workloads, and that money could be put into the 2021 budget to address it. So it's definitely on our radar.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Juncker.
Thanks, Your Worship. Yeah, so a couple things. Yeah, I do remember seeing in the budget for 2021, but my understanding, so I guess I was wrong then with the funding for that parking then. Was that not planned to come out of capital funding, or was the money that was in the development services like budget plan for 2021, the money was meant to be used though from the parking reserve fund? Am I understanding that correctly then?
Yes,
okay, I see Ms. Wade
so.
nodding her head, yes.
Yep.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, I totally understand Councillor's concerns here. I mean, I was doing some research this week and I found that, Your Worship, from your previous term when the building downtown there was in the news and whatnot, and that latest news article then said that the $20,000 in lieu of parking spaces at that time was the 5th highest of any municipality in BC or Alberta. And I mean, it's a bit high to me. And I mean, I understand we need to collect revenue in order to fund these things. But on the other side of the thing, I'm weary of charging such a large amount of money in lieu of these parking spaces. And I know that it's probably common, and Ms. Wade could attest to it, I'm sure it's common that developers, they don't want to pay money if they don't have to. They want to get away with paying as little as money. They're developers. They're in it to make money. So I mean, the developer himself has told me he's very upset and doesn't want to pay the money, and that if he has to pay the money, he might just probably not build the project. And I mean, that's a concern to me, as I think this is a terrific infill building. So I lean towards not requiring it, and also because of it being the veterinarian clinic as well. So I'm still in favor of just varying it to the 9 and not requiring on this project. However, I wanted to note too, though, and maybe Your Worship, he communicated to you as well, or other councillors, that the developer did note to me that he had mentioned to staff, and I think I saw it in the report, that he would be willing to do 2 more uncovered spaces as well. So it would bring it to 11. So I'd be content doing the 14 to 11. I just note that it might not be as appealing of a building, but either varying it to 9 or varying it to 11 with the uncovered, I would support as well. I just don't think the cash in lieu on this one is necessary.
So, okay, so you prefer no cash, going to no parking, or 9 to 11, depending on, and I think that's something that would have to be specified, would it not, Ms. Wade, in this variance, if we were to delete or go down, reduce the minimum required parking spaces, then we would have to talk about if he was willing to go 11, and that means not covered. Is that something that does, or we just send it back to you and you work it out with him? How does that work?
through your worship, if he changes the design, because we have had these conversations and the applicant wished to keep it the way it is, then it would have to come back to us, and then we would have to redo it and bring it back to council.
Okay.
So sorry, your worship.
And I know that this proponent is anxious to get going on building his building. So I think he would like to keep it at 9 with the covered parking. And so then it goes back to us. The proposal for us is collect the money or not collect the money, or is there an option to split the funds, that sort of thing. I mean, there are ways of doing that. And we split it down the middle, where the city gets part of what they need and the proponent gets less charge, that sort of thing. Councillor Juncker, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so your worship, I mean, I propose the amendment that I'm in favor of and we
Okay,
can
I just want
discuss that one?
Yeah, I just want to,
Sorry.
Councillor Charlotte had her hand up too, and I just want to see if she wants to weigh in before we put a motion, okay? Thank you.
Yep, for
Councillor
sure.
Charlotte.
Yeah, I like the case that's being built for the vet clinic, that they don't really need the parking spaces, but I'm really shy about the precedent this sets for our council. I know that in the past, these variances may have gone and the cash in lieu was discussed and waived, but this is our first kick at this can as far as I'm aware of. And I just, we need to be funding these works in the way that they were intended to be funded. I'm still open to that conversation, and I like the idea of maybe splitting it where it doesn't need to be quite this high. Maybe not all 4, and we go 2 and 2, and then that way we're meeting them halfway, because I do like this application. I'm just nervous about making decisions because we like an application. I would rather have something that's more concrete.
Well, until we have a strategy and plan, so Ms. McCabe, you had your hand up. Did you want to weigh in before? Okay. Before we have a formal strategy and plan, the idea, or in place, the idea is to collect the money to put it into a reserve fund so that we can actually move a plan forward. And so somewhere along the line, some councils said $20,000 seemed to be an appropriate amount of money. Is that not correct, Ms. Lowe? Somewhere along the line, we had picked that figure. It wasn't just we grabbed it out of thin air. It was something that was put in a policy or a bylaw. We came up with those funds.
Yeah, that's correct. But it
Okay.
is quite common in other municipalities.
Yeah. All right. So having said that, so now we're in the situation where we've got. You with us, Councillor, or are you moving around?
Sorry, yeah, my thing cut out. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, but it's still sporadic.
Sorry. It cut out, so I didn't hear anything that people said, but I'm here.
Okay. So basically what we're trying to get across is that somewhere along the line in previous councils, we came up with this amount. It wasn't just something we pulled out of the air. And so to move a parking strategy or amendments to parking, or some sort of a plan for parking, whether that be another building on the city parking lot or public transportation or whatever kind of parking management strategy, that's what these funds are used for. And so we need to make sure that we have funds moving forward. So if you want to set precedent as a council, then you can go right ahead with exactly what the staff have here and saying, okay, we're adhering to the policy. If you're not happy about that, then you can amend that. But I want you to be cognizant of that as we move forward with other parking plans. So just be aware of that, okay? So now Councillor Juncker wants to put a motion on the table or to amend this motion. So before we do that, I'm going to go back and see if everyone's had a chance to ask questions about what's already here. So Councillor Elliott, do you want to weigh in with anything?
Yeah, several things. Obviously we have a shortage of commercial space in our city. Virtually, our downtown core is fully occupied. Whether that'll be the same after this bug thing goes through, I don't know. But right now it's fully occupied, and we've had a real dilemma finding space for new businesses in our community. I think this is a great opportunity, and the other as well, that they're both additions to commercial space in our downtown or relatively near our downtown core. So that's a win. Enforcement, I don't know about the residents in the area, but to me, I don't know how diligent our bylaw guys are working that area of our town. And maybe that's a concern, or maybe that's a way to address the worry over parking spaces in front of homes. I think that might be a message we can get overcome, the resistance that's being presented here. I'm just curious what it's going to take a covered parking lot off their plans, and how much time that would consume of the planning department. And I'm just saying, to me, it just take a couple of pillars out, and I don't quite understand how that could sort of delay the project by that much, by just removing a couple of covered stalls. So I wonder, to me, that's 11 stalls off-site, off the street. And, for the vet clinic, when he was gone there, I've never seen more than 3 people at one time. So I'm quite trying to understand the whole process here. So I understand people are concerned, but I don't know if it's a real concern.
Okay, so I just want to go back to this. So what's in front of us in this motion is to vary the setbacks and talk about the parking and get rid of the loading requirements. We know in the back of our mind what the proponent is proposing to put in there, but that's yet to be, correct, Ms. Wade? Okay, so that's yet to be. So what's in front of us is dealing with the setbacks and the parking requirements. So now I'm going to go back to Councillor Juncker. So the motion on the table is to have parking spaces, 13 of them. He ends up paying for 4. And that's the current motion that's on the table because of the cash and lieu through the report. My comment that I had made, are you interested in splitting that cost? I know the proponent wants just to be left alone, not to have to pay any extra money. And I'm leaving that comment out there. So now, Councillor Juncker, I'm going to come back to you because I think we've heard from everyone. Is there an amendment that you want to put on the table in section 1B or 2B here?
Sure, Your Worship. And I think it's important to remember too, though, I understand what you guys are saying in respects to the maybe going half and half, but ultimately that's not our decision. That would, well, in the sense that it would first be his decision if he agrees to even do that. And then if it was to do that, you would have to go back, send it back to the developer, and then it would be coming back to us again. And I'm just thinking in terms of actual delays and whatnot. But
okay, before you go any further, I want to get clarification from Ms. Wade, because if you reduce it to 0, that's amending it as well.
What to 0?
The parking you were talking about.
No, I'm not proposing amending parking to 0.
Okay, you're amending him not paying anything, correct?
So on part B, on part B, it's reduction of the minimum required parking spaces from 14 to 13, which staff supported that variance by 1. And then they noted that we're still missing some. So the option would be to do cash in lieu. I'm not in support of the cash in lieu on this project after reading and hearing from the neighbors today who are now saying they do support it and the type of business that's going in there. I don't think we would have seen the opposition at all if they knew what was going in there. A few neighbors thought it was going to be Airbnbs, but I wasn't listed because the use isn't fit for that zoning, that C2 zoning. So my understanding is we're still going to have a zoning variance come back to us as well here. If the vet's to go into there, we'll have to vary the zoning as well to allow for that. But I think
Miss Wade had her hand up, so I want her to comment on that. Okay, Councillor, thank you. Ms. Wade.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I just wanted to say that we're talking about a development permit, form and character, and we're not talking about land use, and we're not talking about zoning. So this is to be reviewed on the legislation of form and character, and that is what is before you. I also wanted to just point out when it comes to cash in lieu, it is council's discretion how they deal with cash in lieu, whether it is for 4, 3, 2, 1, or none. So I just wanted to give that clarification.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I just mean in the sense that I just don't know if he'll agree to it, but I understand it is our obviously our discretion as a council. And I only mentioned the zoning. I know this is forming character, but when talk about the actual parking, a lot of people made it clear to me that their thoughts on the parking changed from when they actually knew what was going in there. So regardless, yeah,
Okay,
my
so
amendment would
Councillor
be.
Ms. Lowe has her hand up, so I just want her to weigh in before you go any further. Just a moment, Ms. Lowe.
Your worship, I was hoping that Marianne could clarify. So this number one, this resolution for number one is with respect to A, B, and C. Is this where he would vary any type of a cash in lieu requirement, or is that later on in the resolutions? I think that needs to be made clear for council.
I'm not varying the cash in lieu.
You're just very.
Ms. Wade, if you could answer the question.
Yes, it's later on that we would have to vary it.
Okay.
But
But
Your worship, if I may, I'm not proposing to vary the cash in lieu.
Okay.
I'm proposing to vary the actual parking requirement.
Okay. So everybody understands that.
Mr. Simon has his hand up. Mr. Simon.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to, sorry, there we go. Just to provide some, there we go. Just to provide some clarity. Sorry, just dealing through the technical challenges here. To provide some clarity, should council choose to increase the variance beyond what staff are supporting? So staff are supporting a variance to 13. Council wants to support that to 10, to 9, which is what the applicant's asking for. Whatever council chooses as appropriate, that will have an impact on the subsequent resolutions with respect to cash in lieu. If council chooses to vary what the applicant is requesting from 14 all the way to 9, then the cash in lieu resolutions are no longer needed because a full variance has been granted. If council chooses to grant a variance from 14 to 12, 14 to 11, whatever it is, then those cash in lieu resolutions are still required, and staff can help guide council on the changes to the resolutions that need to occur. What we're looking for from council is for you guys to tell us what you're supporting. So we have the staff recommendation, we have what the applicant wants all the way down to 9, and if there's something in between that council's in support of, where it's split down the middle or whatever at your discretion is deemed to be appropriate, we can help guide you with respect to the appropriate resolutions and making sure that all the permits get amended accordingly to reflect that.
Okay, now Councillor Juncker, back to what you were saying.
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. And thanks, Mr. Simon, for clarifying. That was my understanding or impression as well. So yeah, and I appreciate Ms. Lowe chiming in as well. But yeah, I wasn't the varying the cash in lieu. I was just proposing an amendment to vary the actual parking on this one, as I just don't believe that anything more than 9 is necessary, and that's just my opinion. So my amendment would be to vary the 1B, the parking requirements, reduction of minimum required parking spaces from 14 down to 9.
Okay, is there a seconder for that amended motion? I will ask one more time. Is there a seconder for that amended motion? Hearing none, that motion is, so Councillor Elliott, are you seconding, or are you waving at me, or what are you doing?
So, okay, yeah, let's put that on the table and discuss it.
Okay, so Mr. Simon, so that's seconded. So that motion now we will talk about. Mr. Simon had his hand up. So if we can go there.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Again, just to clarify, the resolution that's on the floor is to vary the parking requirements from 14 to 9. Should that happen, a full variance has been granted and the opportunity for cash in lieu or securing parking through a subsequent covenant is no longer available. So just to provide that clarity so that all of council is aware of what the impact of that resolution is, so that you guys have the full picture, just wanted to provide that clarification.
Perfect.
Okay.
That's what I was trying to say. Perfect.
Okay, so let's vote on this then, and then we can be led by staff through the next sections. Is that okay? I'm not getting a response here. So do you want to?
Yes, that's okay.
Okay. All right, so any discussion on the motion on the table, varying this parking from 13 or 14 down to 9? Anyone want to discuss that? Councillor Rind, and then Councillor Elliott, then Councillor Juncker.
Yeah, I'm not in support of this amendment. I don't think there's really much justification for it. I think given that they designed the property with the understanding that they might need to make some allowances or pay for additional parking, I think it doesn't make any sense to not collect the cash in lieu.
Okay. Who else had their hand up? Councillor Elliott and then Councillor Sherlock.
Yes, just going back to 11 stalls. Without the covered parking, he can make 11 stalls. Is that correct?
Mr. Simon.
Thank you, Your Worship. So through Your Worship to all of council, I think what we need to focus in on here is the application before us today is for 9 stalls being proposed on site. There is an option, should council not support the variance, that the applicant can go and amend their proposal. If the applicant can fit 11 stalls on there, 12 stalls, whatever they can make work, then we can bring that back for future council consideration. That would require revised drawings, which would need to be appended to the development permit. So there is some staff work that we would have to do with the applicant. So I think that the main focus is the applicant has applied for a variance from 14 to 9. That's really the question that's before council. And if council wants to not support that variance and see what other modifications the owner or applicant can make, there is an option that they can do that.
So you're telling me we have to vote or 9, we can't suggest 11 stalls and reach a solution today?
Through Your Worship, that is correct. You would not be able to vote on 11 stalls and approve this because we do not have drawings to support that. And that is not the variance that was advertised, I would add as well, when we sent out notification letters to the adjacent landowners.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Just a question, if I may, Your Worship, for Mr. Simon.
Yes.
If Mr. Simon, if we varied it to 11, would you and your team, like with Ms. Wade, then go back to the developer and say, council, hypothetically, if council approved 11, you would go back to the developer and say, this is what council approved. Are you willing to do drawings? I'm just trying to understand. Or can we not? I think that makes sense. Yeah, if you understand my question.
Okay, Mr. Simon or Ms. Wade want to weigh in?
Through Your Worship, I'll let Ms. Wade deal with that.
Okay, Ms. Wade.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I just want to respond to that. So the application before you is to provide 9 parking stalls. We've advertised it legally under the LGA for those variances. So we have had those discussions with the applicant, and this is the application that we have had before them. If they wish to do 11 and change their design, they have to revise it and come back to us, and we have to bring it back to council.
Okay. Councillor Sherlock.
Yeah, I am not in support of the amendment to the motion to vary straight down to 9 with no cash in lieu. I would rather see us split this with them where we can vary down to 11 and expect cash in lieu of 2 parking stalls, either cash in lieu or a covenant on other options.
Okay. All right, so now we've heard from everyone on that. I'm also in favor of cash in lieu, splitting half and half sort of thing. So I'm going to ask the question on the amended motion. And that's going immediately from 14 down to 9. So all those in favor, raise your hand, please. Okay, note Councillor Juncker, Councillor Elliott. Those opposed, Councillor Ryan, Councillor Sherlock, and myself. So we're back at the original motion. So now we were talking about cash in lieu. So Ms. Lowe, did you want to weigh in here?
Oh, you're doing it right. You're good.
Okay, but we're back at the original motion. So does anyone want to put a motion on the table as we discussed earlier, where we actually split from the 13 down to 11 and take 2 in cash in lieu? Councillor Sherlock, you have your hand up.
I would make that amendment.
Okay, is there a second?
That would be to, do you want me to outline what that is, or is that enough
Yes,
for what?
please. Yeah, that would be
Yeah.
clear.
So I would like to make an amendment very similar to Councillor Younker's, but instead of reducing the minimum required parking stalls to 13 or to 9, I would say reducing it to 11, and we can modify the later amendment or motions to adjust the cash and lieu.
But
Okay.
if you reduce it to 11, they wouldn't have to provide cash in lieu for the other two, would they?
That's it.
Yeah.
Under the current design, they would. Well, let me speak. Under the current design, because it's now 9, we're going to 11, cash in lieu with the motion on the table. I see Mr. Simon shaking his head. It would be cash in lieu. If they wanted to come back and talk to planning about how they could do that without having to pay cash in lieu, that would be their option. Is that correct, Mr. Simon?
Thank you, Your Worship. So if council does support a variance down to 11 and the applicant wishes to run with that variance and revise their drawings, then that would be something that we would have to discuss with the applicant if they wanted to accommodate those 11 stalls on site and the proper process moving forward to bring that back for future council consideration. The way the resolutions are currently structured, if council chooses to reduce the stalls from 14 to 11, they would still be required to pay cash in lieu or secure parking through a covenant within 300 meters of the site for those remaining 2 stalls.
All right. Okay, is that clear, Councillor Ryan?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any further discussion on this motion, Councillor Elliott?
So when the proponent revises the zoning variance with the vet clinic in the C2 zone, do you think that's enough time? Well, not sure when that might happen, but do you think it's enough time to have a revised design in place, reviewed by the planning department? If it's done at the same time, can they do them concurrently?
I don't know whether that's part of the motion that's on the table.
No, but
as far
we're
as-
asking for 11 stalls, and also he's got to come in with a variance on the zoning. Why not do both at the same
Well, a
time?
variance is not in front of us at this point in time, but in answer to your question, so that you don't get frustrated with me, I will ask Mr. Simon or Miss Wade if they have the answer to that question at this point. Miss Wade.
Through your worship. So first of all, the text amendment to the C1 and C2 zoning is in the future. It doesn't just pertain to this site. There's other lands that it pertains to. So it is more of a amendment to improve the C1, C2 zones. And that will be coming before council, which is separate from a development permit, which is before you for today.
Okay, Councillor Elliott.
Yeah, I just went through a text amendment for an industrial zone, or was it privy to the information on it, and it took 6 months. Now, is that the timeline you're looking for a text amendment?
I don't, again, that motion's not on the table, but Miss Wade, I'll get you to weigh in.
In regards to the M1 text amendment,
It was just a restaurant, a facility in an industrial zone.
but just to clarify that, it came before council and it has to go to a public hearing, and that we had to put on hold because of COVID. And so that'll be coming forward for the public hearing and council's consideration. So that one is not complete. So I can't speak to those timelines given the circumstances that we are in currently. And the C1, C2 will be coming forward to council. And as we work with corporate and the provincial orders to bring forward our first public hearing, which we are trying to do very shortly, then we would have a better idea of the timelines.
Okay, Miss LaRose, you have a comment?
Yes, Your Worship, I need a seconder for that resolution, please.
Okay, did we not get a seconder for that resolution? So Councillor Charlotte had put a resolution on to split the difference to move from 13 down to 11. Was there someone who wanted to second that? So for conversation, I will second that. Okay, so now we have an amended motion on the table that we've been discussing. So we can go with voting on this, moving from 13 down to 11, taking cash in lieu for that. Is there any further discussion on that motion on the table? And the intent with that motion was to split the difference between what the proponent would like to do, where he doesn't pay anything, and what the city feels that they need for their reserve fund. And so my comment was split the difference. That's what we've done historically with a lot of this stuff, where we've reduced it or moved it around. But that's not on the table. What's on the table today is the motion to move from 13 to 11. So I'm going to ask again for this vote on this amended motion. So is there anyone in favor of this motion? Councillor Charlotte and myself opposed. So we have, where's Councillor Elliott? What are you doing? He's opposed as well. So this motion is now dead. We're going back to the original motion on the table. So having heard all of these stories, do we want to move these motions forward? Do you want to discuss any further, or do you want me to ask the question?
Your worship, can I?
Yes, Councillor Junker, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm just not sure where we're headed here. It seems like none of us are in favor of, I think, or my understanding, sorry, is that Councillor Ryan is in support of the full motion. The four of us are not in support of the one, and then two of us are supporting of it going to 9, and then yourself and Councillor Charlotte are in favor of it going 50-50. So I'm not sure where we go here. We've got 5 and we're 30-30-30 basically.
Yep.
Not agreeing. So I'm not sure. Yeah,
So,
I mean,
so do we want to have further discussion of the motion that's on the table? Do you want to do cash in lieu, or do we just basically say we've defeated the motion to go down to 9, which the proponent wants? So where are we at with this? Or do we send it, or do we just send this back to developer and say you have to figure out your parking spaces on the property? Ms. Lowe has her hand up. She's waving at me.
So, Your Worship, yeah, you've defeated 2 amendments to an original resolution that's on the table that's been seconded. I would suggest we call the question on the original motion.
I would just propose an additional amendment, if I may, Ms. Lowe.
Yes, of course.
I would just propose an amendment, Your Worship, to go 50-50, but without the cash in lieu, just go to 11 then.
Okay, so.
I mean, I'm just thinking that's just the other option. Otherwise, I don't think we're, until we get, it's just my impression here that there's no other amendments to propose. And so the only option is, otherwise it's going to have to, if this one gets voted down, it's going to have to be kicked to the developer, or we're going to need another counselor essentially to break the tiebreaker.
Okay, so Mr. Simon and Ms. Wade have their hand up, so I'll let them weigh in before we go back to councilors.
Thank you, Your Worship. So Ms. Wade and I were just looking at each other and had the same idea. So essentially, if you guys do support a variance down to 11, but then there's no obligation to provide cash in lieu or secure parking within 300 meters for this site for those remaining 2 stalls, we've approved something that does not comply with the zoning bylaw without an appropriate variance, which we are not able to do. So we need to make sure that we capture those additional 2 stalls somehow. And the zoning bylaw, as well as the local government act provisions, are the ones that provide for that cash in lieu ability or parking within 300 meters. So you got to think of it as a combined form to be able to provide for the parking requirements as identified in the zoning bylaw. If they can't do that, then council can support a variance without one of those 2 things.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Charlotte.
I'm curious as to where and it's interesting having these conversations on Zoom. It is really hard to see full body language and to be able to talk with each other more naturally. And it seems like we are struggling to find a way to compromise and to have these discussions, to find a happy middle ground somewhere. I'm not a huge fan of the all or nothing. It makes me nervous for a variety of reasons, which is why I voted against the First Amendment. However, meeting somewhere in the middle, if we're not willing to meet somewhere in the middle, I'm wondering where my other counselors are thinking here. Like, is this an all or nothing kind of conversation? Or do we have some room to wiggle and meet in the middle to come to an agreement as a council? And if so, I am happy to hear it.
Councillor Ryan, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, for me, it just comes down to, you know, getting some of those letters of opposition. There were several of them, and I understand that some people may have taken back their position with a more complete understanding of what the development is planning to look like. But again, there's no promises on what that might end up being. But I think we just have to acknowledge that there is a bigger problem when it comes to parking downtown, and it affects lots of people. And if we don't begin to collect money to address this problem, then it's just going to perpetuate forever. So where do we begin with that? And I think what staff has proposed is very reasonable, given the use of the building and given that, you know, we have a bylaw that requires certain numbers of parking spaces for a reason.
Okay, Councillor Charlotte, you had your hand up.
Yeah, no, I mean, by the time Councillor Ryan finished, that makes sense. So you're in support of the full cash in lieu with no negotiations on it, which, fair enough. It does seem like a heft to go from a past councils that would create some variances to expecting this particular building to pay all of it, or close to, and not wiggling at all. Seems like we're not going to be able to fix this deficiency with one or two developments. I do think it's important that we make a stance on the fact that we do take this seriously. We do need cash in lieu. We need to start taking this parking strategy seriously. But I am open to doing it a little gentler as we get into that. So that's where that room for compromise and splitting.
All right. So Councillor Elliott or Councillor Juncker, do you want to give an impression or any thoughts on what you feel is comfortable here?
Just if I could add some extra color to this thing. Downtown Mackenzie, it's rare that any of those entities have parking. None of them are contributing to a parking strategy, but they're all complaining with the lack of parking. To tax the new guy for the full brunt of that study or strategy seems onerous.
Okay, Councillor Juncker, you had your hand up.
Yeah, Your Worship, I would just reiterate again, I completely hear where Councillor Rind is coming from. And while I don't disagree that, you know, you are theoretically perpetuating the problem by not collecting, I also feel like trying to collect off just a few developments now and with such large amounts when some zones we collect off of, but not all commercials or CD zoning. So, you know, there's large developments that are CD zoning, which are clearly an issue, which Ms. Wade has discussed with us. And that's why we all look forward to that parking update bylaw. But I just think, I mean, for this building, I don't see the reason I don't see it necessary. And maybe the developer is bluffing, maybe not, I'm not sure. I just think that when the developers indicated the approximate cost of the building and you know, the parking could be additional 10% of the building, it just seems crazy to me for one use of building, which we know it will be, or yeah, I don't know if that makes sense. But so, I mean, I would be still comfortable making that amendment to go to 11, and with no cash in lieu. Otherwise, we just roll with it, Your Worship. And the developer will discuss with staff, I'm sure.
Okay, Councillor Ryan, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment as well. Like, if we are able to agree and pass this motion that's on the table, then we also give the developer a way to move forward. How they decide to move forward, or if they decide to move forward, is obviously up to them. But we are not requiring them to go back to the drawing boards, change their drawings, do any sort of other delays, if you will, to where they're at in this application. And I think that that's important to note, because they obviously want to start building as soon as possible, and they don't want to incur any other costs. So I can appreciate that meeting in the middle is a nice solution as well, but this is also just a way forward.
Okay, so I appreciate that. That's kind of why I had suggested, you know, going 50-50 here. So we can go back to the original motion. We can basically kick it back. The developer has to come up with the parking. But here the motion on the table is either do 300 meters or cash in lieu of, unless you want to put another amendment on the table.
Well, yeah,
And
your
so-
worship, I just wanted to make that amendment to the 11 if anybody wants to second it.
Okay, let me just go through this here before we deal with that.
Sorry.
So what we're looking at, we're trying to find a happy medium. We have to do something about parking as far as downtown. So Councillor Elliott, you made a point about parking down on Mackenzie. If something were to happen to my building, I would absolutely have a problem with parking if I had to rebuild my building. I get all that. That stuff's all grandfathered in with what we've got now. We're trying to move forward and we're trying to accommodate what the city's needs are and take into consideration what this proponent would like. I get all that. So my question is, rather than being at a stalemate, what do you as a councillor feel you're going to be comfortable with? So there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of us sitting around the table. So go from there. So I'm supportive of us going back and saying, okay, give him 11 parking spots. That means he has to pay for 2 or come up with the parking on his lot or whatever, but he has to basically work out that with the development. So it's either find 300 meters or pay the funds, or he has to talk with the development part and say, okay, I can amend and I can actually put it on my building site. That's my thought. So Councillor Sherlett, how do you feel?
I would love to see that, but that was the amendment I put forward, and because it didn't pass, as far as I'm aware, we cannot bring that back. Councillor Younker's suggestion to go to 11 but not require cash in lieu, from my understanding from Ms. Wade, that is not legal. And that would be part of the second motion or another motion anyway. So we would still be changing he would still be looking at the same amendment I did, which was defeated. So I don't think we can do that either. This is where I'm trying to figure out where we are with this stalemate, where if there's room for compromise, I'm happy to hear it. I'm just not hearing any compromise that's something that we can do.
Okay. So Ms. Lowe, do you have some guidance here for us so that we can move this forward? It's either we go back to the developer and he figures out how to put the parking on the spot, whether he makes his building smaller or he pays cash in lieu, or if we end up not putting this through, what's going to happen?
Sorry, I didn't understand why the 11 is illegal. I misunderstood that part.
Ms. Wade, you're muted.
Your worship, I can help provide some clarity
Okay,
there
thank
if that
you.
works for everyone. So through your worship, if we are varying the required parking down to 11 and the applicant is only providing 9 on site, then they are short the 2 parking spaces. Those have to be made up in some other way, or else they are not complying with the zoning bylaw requirements, which they are required to do, hence why they have requested the variance. So we have to make up for those other 2 spaces.
Oh, okay. I appreciate your explanation. But to be clear then, and I see Ms. Wade nodding her head as well, then we cannot, if we were to vary to 11, Mr. Simon, without the cash in lieu, it's not possible for staff to go back to developer and say, council varied it to 11. Can you create 2 more spots?
So again, through your
Or
worship,
the developer needs to come to us with that.
So through your worship and to all of council, again, the proposal we have before us is for 9 stalls.
Okay.
Should the applicant wish to change it to accommodate 11 stalls on site, that's going to require revised drawings. And then you'll also notice in the package, we have the drawings that are attached to the development variance permit, which would need to come back for further amendment. So if council wants to look at what an option is to potentially withhold making a decision and direct the applicant, that they would be supportive of 11 and have them go and revise drawings, and then they can work with staff to bring that back at a later point in time. That is another potential option that is available to council. However, I will caution, if the question of timing is a concern, that is going to be required again to come back go through the notification process and back before council for consideration. And again, potentially the advisory planning commission. So staff would have to review the process internally.
So I
Okay.
appreciate, oh, your worship, if I may.
Go ahead, then I'm going to get Councillor Ryan. So just
Yes,
say what you have to say.
so I appreciate that explanation and I understand now better. So my apologies that it wasn't clear to me the first time. So what you're saying then is we can't pre-approve 11 and go back to the developer. He would need to change everything and come back to us with the 11. So, but is an option, and I mean, the developer did say to me he had proposed to staff to do the 11, but that staff were not in support of that, is what he had said to me. I'm not sure whether or not that's true or not. So my question then for Ms. Wade or Mr. Simon, to break out of this stalemate, maybe Ms. Wade could weigh in. Would it be a better idea then, if we're looking at this 11, we all kind of, besides Councillor Ryan, we're all talking about 11, would it be an idea to make a motion to defer this back to staff, to go back to the developer and say, look, council wants you to come up with 11. Are we able to work something there? Is that an idea, Ms. Wade? Or a thought there? I understand that it could cause delays. I mean, I'm not sure if we need to send it to the APC, as that's just a committee of council, but it might be something, as he did express to me, he could do the 11, and that might break something here, your worship.
Yeah.
So through your worship, so we have had lots of discussions with the applicant, and we have gone through the different scenarios. It was the applicant's choice to move forward with the proposal before you. If they choose that they would like to redo their application and show 11 stalls, and that fits the requirements, and it'll have to be reviewed internally, go to APC and come back to council.
Okay. All right, Councillor Ryan, do you have a comment? And then I think we need to go back to the original motion on the table and do a vote. Councillor Ryan?
Yeah, so to me, that makes it very clear that the applicant was very aware of what was being put forward to council. And so therefore, they are probably fine with that. Obviously, they don't want to pay money that they might not have to pay. And that's where we're getting these conversations from. But I mean, this is a way for the applicant to move forward, the city to get the money, and everybody to be happy. I don't know why we're trying to bend over backward to give leniency to a developer that willingly had these motions put forward to council.
Okay, thank you for that comment. Councillor Elliott, you have one last comment?
Just curious, are we set in stone with the $20,000 per stall? Could that be reduced to, say, half that?
No, we're set in stone with that.
Oh, my mute's off or on. Your worship, I would make a motion then to just defer this back to staff to go back to the developer. It seems like we're not getting anywhere here.
I think we need to vote on the motion that's on the table before we defer back. So let's vote on the motion and let's see where we're at after that voting. If you want to move this forward and you vote in favor of the parking spaces, he has to come up with the money, but he's actually able to develop his development moving forward. I'm in favor of him being able to develop his development and move forward. Councillor Charlotte, you have your answer. Hands up.
Just a quick question. If we vote in favor of this and the developer, after hearing the conversation, says, maybe I redo, if he does decide to redo the drawings to go for the 11 stalls, he would still have that prerogative to do that, correct?
Ms. Wade or Mr. Simon?
Okay, sorry, lots going on here. So
yeah, sorry. I just want to make sure we understand what's going on with, like, I will vote in favor of this just to keep it moving. And like Councillor Ryan said, let's let this developer develop. If that fee is too onerous, I mean, I assume he knew what this was the chance.
yes, so the applicant would be aware of what the fees were, and this was all discussed at APC as well, where the applicant was present. we are very aware that it is the applicant's wish not to pay the cash in lieu and to have the straight variance. Staff has to follow the legislation and make the recommendations they feel is the best serves for the public interest in the community. And that's what you've got before you.
Okay, so having said that, I think we've all said that we're in support of this development moving forward. It's dealing with the parking. We know that the developer doesn't want to pay anything for the parking, but we have a motion on the table that we are now going to vote on. So section A, basically, we are doing the setback requirements. Section B, we're moving from 14 to 13 for parking spots. That's 4 more than the 9. So there'll be 4 that have to be paid for. And section C is taking the loading requirements from 1 to 0. So any further discussion on the motions that are on the table? All those in favor? And that includes me. So Councillor Charlotte, Councillor Rind, Mayor Sulz, those opposed. Councillor Juncker and Councillor Elliott. Your hand's up, Councillor Juncker, or you're opposing, correct? Sorry, I can't hear you.
Sorry, yes.
Okay, so 3 in favor, 2 opposed. This motion is carried. We're moving on to item number 2. Does somebody want to put this motion on the table for me, please? Councillor Charlotte.
That in accordance with City of Revelstoke Policy DS-7, staff prepare and enter into an encroachment agreement with the owner to be registered on title as Section 219 covenant to allow for canopy cover to encroach plus or minus 1.83 meters into the 2nd Street West Road right-of-way, and if necessitated by land title office requirements, to allow such encroachment agreement to be registered as a statutory right-of-way at the owner's cost.
Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Juncker. Any discussion on the motion that he's going to put some canopies over the windows on his building? Seeing no further discussion, I will ask the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Our motion's carried. No opposed. Thank you. Item number 3. Someone want to put that on the table, please? Councillor Charlotte.
Sure. That prior to issuance of a building permit and as a condition of issuance of a development permit for the commercial building, noting that 9 parking spaces are proposed to be provided on site and 1 space has been varied further to DVP 2020-01, the owner is authorized and required to satisfy the remaining requirement of 4 parking spaces through either A, the payment of cash in lieu in accordance with Section 5251D and 5252A of the Local Government Act and Section 12.53, 4, and 5 of the zoning bylaw number 1264. And as per the fees set forth in fees and charges bylaw number 2256, or B, a registered easement and S219 covenant securing the provision of parking spaces on a property located within 300 meters of the use in which they serve, in accordance with Section 5251C of the Local Government Act and Section 12.51 of zoning bylaw number 1264, or C, a combination of the above.
Is there a seconder for that motion? Somebody want to second it? Councillor Elliott. Any discussion on the motion? Councillor Rind. Unmute.
I'm just trying to understand the registered easement. Is that to say if the developer owns land within 300 meters and maybe it's vacant or whatever, they can assign it to be a parking spot? Is that what that's saying?
Yep. Can they rent land as well, Ms. Wade?
Good question.
So what was that again, at land?
Can they rent land as well, or do they have to own the land within 300 meters?
They have to own the land within 300 meters or make an arrangement with another property owner where they would have the registered 219 covenant on it, and it runs with perpetuity with the lands.
Cool. And I saw in the report, sorry, can I ask a question?
Yes, you may. Yes.
Awesome. I saw in the report, I think it says that that's not possible. Like the proponent was saying that that's not feasible. Is that right?
That's what they had indicated to us.
Okay. But I guess it could change if maybe they know now that that could be registered with somebody else's land. Yeah, that's all. Thanks.
Okay. Any further discussion on the motion on the table? All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Juncker, Councillor Elliott opposed, motion's carried. Moving on to item number 4. Someone want to put that on the table, please? Councillor Charlotte.
I keep going with my reading practice here. The development permit DP 2020-01 be approved for form and character for a single-story commercial building located at 415 2nd Street West, Parcel B, KM 17097, Block 8, Section 34, Township 23, Range 2, west of the 6th Meridian, Kootenai District Plan 636, subject to the following preconditions to issuance being met. A, the deficiency of 5 on-site parking spaces, noting 14 spaces required with 9 shown on plans, be satisfactorily addressed through either variance or letter of intent to pay cash in lieu or provide off-site parking at time of building permit in accordance to the Local Government Act and city's bylaws, all to the reasonable satisfaction of city staff, who may then sign and issue this.
Okay, is there a seconder for the motion? I got Councillor Elliott seconding. Okay, any discussion on the motion? Okay, I'll ask the question. All those in favor? Opposed? No, Councillor Elliott, are you a for or opposed?
So this same parking issue, the same fees, that's correct?
Yep.
No, I'm opposed. I'm in
Okay.
favor of the development, but opposed to the parking.
Okay, so Councillor Juncker, Councillor Elliott are opposed to this motion. Sulz, Charlotte, and Rind are in favor. Motion is carried. Thank you. So now we have dealt with E6 development. We're moving on. I think, Mr. Simon, you have a presentation for the next one.
Yes, Your Worship, that is correct. Thank you. I'll share my screen here, try and run through this one as quickly as possible. So what we have before you today is another development variance permit and development permit application for a mixed-use building. So again, just to give you a brief high-level overview, we're going to start off with some background info, then get into the proposal overview, looking at the development variance permit and then the development permit, followed by the policy direction that we use to evaluate the applications, and close off with the staff recommendation. So the application is for the properties at 519 and 521 2nd Street West, as shown here in the zoning map. I will note that the properties have been consolidated since this map was made, so it is only one parcel. It is approximately 571 square meters, so about 0.14 acres in size. Again, similar to the other application, falls within development permit area B, downtown revitalization. And again, same thing, zone C2, surrounded by commercial and residential, as well as institutional property, the old Mountain View school site there. So again, this proposal was circulated to 53 adjacent landowners within the area within a 100-meter notification distance. And this was for the specific of the variance application. So 14 letters in opposition of the variances were received. And then the owner's agent has provided a letter outlining the rationale in support of the variances for council. So getting into a brief overview of the proposal for a mixed-use building. So 4 commercial spaces on the main floor. And then we're looking at 5 residential units, 1 being a affordable housing unit that the owner will enter into a housing agreement with the city on. They have requested a reduction again in parking and loading requirements. And again, they are seeking council's permission to enter into an encroachment agreement for the canopy cover over 2nd Street West. So moving on to the development variance permit, they are requesting 2 variances, reduce loading stalls from 1 to 0, and then reduce parking from 12 to 7. Now, this is similar to the other application, so I'll try not to spend too much time, but one thing to make council aware of right off the bat with respect to parking is we need to break down the parking in this circumstance between the commercial requirements and the residential requirements. So I'll get to that in a minute. So to start off with the loading reduction, again, staff do support the variance to reduce loading requirements. Typically for service commercial development, loading demands are pretty minimal. The OCP again identifies laneways being used for deliveries, and streets in this neighborhood are generally wide enough for loading. So staff do support the reduction in required loading spaces. Now moving on to the parking requirements. So the zoning bylaw does require a total of 12 spaces. So again, this is where we break it out. 8 of those spaces are for residential, 4 of them are for the commercial use. The applicant has proposed 7 spaces total. 5 of those spaces are for the residential use and 2 of those spaces are for the commercial use. The proposal needs to address those remaining deficient commercial stalls, being 3 residential and 2 commercial, for a total of 5 deficient stalls. So as we move into looking at the residential parking requirements, again, there's an 8 stall requirement. The applicant's proposing 5, so 1 stall per unit. Staff support a variance for the residential parking requirements from 8 to 6 for the following reasons. One of the units is being proposed as affordable housing, and within the official community plan, there are policies in the affordable housing section that do support parking bonusing for affordable housing, so staff are supportive of it. The parking requirement for the affordable housing unit is 1.5. Again, because the zoning bylaw does require us to round up, staff deem it to be appropriate to round this up to 2 and therefore support a variance for 2. Subject lands are within walking distance to nearby amenities. You'll see in the staff report, the applicant did provide kind of a walkability map that shows a lot of amenities within a 10-meter walking distance. And then within each separate residential unit, they have purposefully extended the entranceway features so that there is room for bicycle storage. So now breaking it off into the commercial requirements. Again, to reiterate, 4 stalls are required for the commercial parking. The site plan and the applicant has only proposed 2 stalls for the commercial parking. Now, similar to the other application, the OCP doesn't have a lot of guidance for staff to use when we're evaluating commercial parking reductions within this area. Therefore, staff don't support the variance for any commercial parking requirements, and again, would be looking to see those requirements satisfied through cash in lieu or secural of a covenant within 300 meters of the site. In addition, just for council's information, we would be working with our public works group and engineering to see what appropriate street signage should be permitted on Garden Avenue as well as 2nd Street. Comparable to what you see along First, generally it's going to be restricted to 2-hour commercial parking. So now kind of summing it up with the total parking requirements, should council support staff's recommendation to reduce the required residential stalls from 8 to 6, we still have those 3 deficient stalls that we need to address. Again, similar, we're going to have the cash in lieu option at just over $61,000, so specifically $61,200 would be paid prior to building permit issuance. The owner, again, would have the opportunity to try and secure parking within 300 meters of the site. And then again, council does have the option to vary the 3 required stalls or whatever number council deems appropriate without requiring cash in lieu or securing parking through a covenant. And similar to the other application, staff support cash in lieu or parking covenant for these 3 remaining deficient stalls. So moving on to a brief overview of the development permit. So again, this is for form, character, and siting of a mixed-use building. They are proposing modern finishes, including dark stained cedar, fiber cement, charcoal metal flashing. The design features of the site include landscape features adjacent to the neighboring property to try and provide some buffering between the developments, rear covered parking with access to the laneway, private balconies and dedicated usable open space on the main floor for both people that are living there as well as people that are visiting for the commercial use. And then bike racks. So not only is there bike storage available as well as personal service storage for the tenants there, there are dedicated bike racks for people that are visiting the commercial space. So when we look at the policy direction that staff used to evaluate this, again, for the development permit, we're looking at those DP area guidelines as contained in the official community plan. So for things like form and character, it is high quality finish. The proponent has included some building articulation to reduce the overall massing of this. The height of the building is approximately 9 meters, whereas the maximum that they're permitted to go to is 12. This is in an attempt to try and be sympathetic to the existing developments in the area so that it's not completely out of place. And then the canopy cover over 2nd Street again provides for that pedestrian coverage, which is supported in the OCP. When we look at the impact on surrounding land uses, generally you're seeing residential, commercial, and then across Garden Avenue, some institutional properties. We do feel that mixed use development is complementary to this. When we look at overall site design features, again, there's the landscape features that are proposed, bike storage and usable open space, as well as the private balconies. Parking and screening is also a requirement of the OCP guidelines. So parking is proposed at the rear with access to a plowed laneway. Landscaping is proposed adjacent to Garden Avenue to screen from the public roadway. Canopy cover over the rear parking. Garbage and recycling contained within each unit. There is a central garbage enclosure on the ground floor to make sure that everything is kept and contained within the building. And then again, the applicant has submitted a landscape plan that would have been available in the package for council to view. So concluding with the staff recommendation, again, for the variance, we're looking at supporting a parking variance from 12 to 10. Those 3 remaining stalls, because again, keep in mind, 7 are provided on site. Those 3 remaining stalls, staff recommend to be provided through the cash in lieu or parking covenant. And then loading stall reduction, staff do support from 1 to 0. Staff are again supportive of council directing us to enter into an encroachment agreement to allow the canopy cover over 2nd Street. And then lastly, for the development permit itself, staff are supportive of this. However, as preconditions to actually issuing the permit, we have to make sure that we collect the landscape security, enter into a housing agreement with the owner for that affordable housing unit. And we also need to ensure that they provide a letter of intent that outlines their willingness to pay cash in lieu or securing parking prior to building permit issuance. Thank you. This concludes my presentation, and Ms. Wade and I are available for questions.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Simon. So before we go into questions, I'm going to ask Councillor to put the motion 5B1 through 1 through, it looks like C on the table, then we can ask questions. Councillor Charlotte.
Sure. The development variance permit DVT 2019-15 located at 519 and 521 2nd Street West, Lot A, Section 34, Township 23, Range 2, west of the 6th Meridian, Plan EPP 95843, be approved for the following variances to zoning bylaw number 1264. A, Section 8.1.22E, parking for dwelling units in combination with commercial uses. I, reduction of required residential parking spaces from 8 to 6. B, Section 12.4A3, required off-street parking residential uses. I, reduction of required residential parking spaces from 8 to 6. And C, Section 13.3.1A, loading requirements. I, reduction of required loading spaces from 1 to 0.
Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Juncker. Now, any discussion on the motion or questions from Mr. Simon? Councillor Juncker.
Yeah, I just think that, again, this is a terrific development and infill. It's glad to see this empty lot finally getting put to good use. I also appreciate the clarification email from Ms. Lowe yesterday just about the parking, as I still was a little confused about that. So I spoke to her yesterday, but thanks again for that clarification. And the only question I just had about the landscaping deposit for Mr. Simon and Ms. Wade is, I'm just curious, when a development permit is issued, my understanding is they have up to 2 years to commence construction. Why is it that our municipality collects the landscaping deposit as a subject, like as a condition subject to getting your development permit versus some others that might say collect it at subdivision or prior to getting issued the BP?
So through your worship, in this particular case, there is no subdivision associated with the application. And in accordance with the Local Government Act requirements, that's where staff derive the power to collect this as a condition of the development permit. So the Local Government Act gets very specific in terms of what can be done at building permit stage and development permit stage. And a landscape security is something that should be taken at development permit stage. And then after final occupancy is granted, generally within 6 months, assuming we get everything signed off by a landscape architect, then portions of that security do start to get returned to make sure that it is done in accordance with that plan.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate that. So it's the Local Government Act that kind of guides you guys on, and by you guys, I mean your team in their development services across the province in at what stages to collect those then?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, yeah, I was just curious why it was collected at that stage. I just thought it might be a hindrance to developers, but if the Local Government Act, then that's just good to know. But other than that, yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Any other, Councillor Elliott?
Yeah, just that the Local Government Act suggests collection at DP. Does it also give you the option at building permit stage?
Through your worship. So in the Local Government Act, it talks about taking landscaping at various land use application processes. What the local municipality can do is create bylaws to inform when those are taken later on. And we currently do not have that bylaw. So what we do, we are reliant on the Local Government Act, and then we also have requirements within our under the BC Building Code. There's certain requirements that are there in regards to landscaping and when we accept those as well. And subdivision, sorry, sorry.
That answer your question, Council?
DCCs as well, right? We could create a bylaw to collect whatever stage we deem appropriate, right? We can make that decision. We could create a bylaw to say at building permit or at development permit stage, for instance.
Does that follow the Local Government Act, Ms. Wade, for a bylaw to be proposed, made, that sort of thing, in contravention of what the Local Government Act is, or in concert with it if we move it from development stage to building permit stage?
Yeah, so development cost charges are something that are outlined in our subdivision and servicing bylaw, and they talk about that. So that's dealt with through that. So I don't want to confuse the two issues here, because DCCs and landscape security are two different things.
Okay. That doesn't answer the question, but we could make a bylaw to decide when, if we wanted to collect the landscape fees, just as we can do for DCCs or any other fee charges that we could come up with. Is that correct?
I'll let Ms. Wade answer the question, but we're really deviating from the motion that's on the table.
Yeah. Yes, we can deal with bylaws as we move forward when we look at, our development procedures bylaw, and we can flesh out some of those things. Normally you do it from a hierarchy, depending, because you need a development permit in order to do a subdivision, and then from the subdivision, and you're creating a building, then you have to figure out the timing of that, because a lot of the reasons for taking the landscaping is to protect the land so that you're not dealt with scarred lands and something that isn't built in an eyesore.
Okay, thank you both. Any further discussion on the motion on the table? Councillor Ryan.
Yeah, I'm inclined to vote against this, even though I think it's a really awesome development, only because it just doesn't seem like there's enough parking being allowed. If 3 of the units are going to be 3-bedroom units and they're only allowing 1 parking stall per unit, that's not very much. Even if it is downtown and there's lots of walking access, we can't ignore the fact that most people own a vehicle. Maybe not most people, but a lot of people who would be buying a brand new unit downtown, there's a good chance they would have a unit, a vehicle. So I'm trying to go back to the report. I did read it, but I'm just wondering if you can refresh my memory why the residential, why it was reduced from 8 to 6. What was the justification for that?
Part of that is the requirement or the relaxing because of the housing amenity for low-income housing or affordable housing, pardon my language, on that. And the other space, I think, was Mr. Simon, would you care to weigh in on how that was done?
Sure. Thank you, Your Worship, and to all of Council and to Councillor Rind. So essentially the rationale where staff landed at supporting a variance from 8 to 6, the main one being the affordable housing unit. So in the OCP, there are provisions in there that not only allow for additional density, but as well as parking bonusing when affordable housing is proposed. And staff did feel it was appropriate to reflect that in our recommendation. The applicant also did design the features to accommodate additional bike storage. So they are trying to cater to a community and potential owners that are going to be utilizing that method of transportation. And then as well, the general walkability of the site was the other reason why staff felt it was appropriate to support. And I will note as well, staff didn't support it fully. We supported it from 8 to 6. The applicant is requesting it from 8 to 5. So staff still are looking for that 1 additional stall in addition to the commercial stalls to be accommodated via other means.
That answer your question, Councillor Ryan?
Yeah, it does. And the commercial units, that's based on square footage?
Through your
Okay, and it
worship,
was
yes, that is
reduced for similar reasons?
Through your worship, staff are not supporting a reduction
To-
for the commercial parking
Okay,
requirement.
that's right. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Charlotte.
Just saying that I'm happy to vote in favor of this. I think the staff have done a great job here. Going from 2 parking stalls required for an affordable house, or the 1.5 down to the 1 makes perfect sense to me. And giving the extra bonus because they're putting in affordable housing makes sense. But I agree no farther. Getting the cash in lieu will help contribute towards our parking strategy and our move forward with trying to deal with this issue that just keeps getting worse. So I'm happily voting in favor of this one.
Okay, any further discussion on the motion on the table? All those in favor, raise your hand, please. Opposed? Note Councillor Rind is opposed. Motion is carried. Moving on to item 2. Councillor Juncker?
Yeah, Your Worship, prior to this motion being read, I need to step out.
Okay,
I got to leave the meeting.
okay.
Thank you.
Note that Councillor Juncker is leaving the meeting at this point.
Why?
We still have quorum.
Yes, we do.
Okay. So we're going to move on to item 2. Does someone want to read the motion that's in your package, please? Councillor Charlotte.
Just getting to the right spot here. All right, that in accordance with City of Revelstoke Policy DS.DS7, staff prepare and enter into an encroachment agreement with the owner to be registered on title as Section 219 covenant to allow for canopy cover to encroach plus or minus 1.3 meters into the 2nd Street West Road right-of-way, and if necessitated by land title office requirements, to allow such encroachment agreement to be registered as a statutory right-of-way at the owner's cost.
Okay, seconder for the motion, Councillor Rind. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to item 3. Will someone read that, please? Councillor Rind?
That prior to issuance of a building permit and as a condition of issuance of a development permit for the mixed-use building, noting that 7 parking spaces are proposed to be provided on site and 2 spaces have been varied further to DVP 2019-15, the owner is authorized and required to satisfy the remaining requirement of 3 parking spaces through either A, the payment of cash in lieu in accordance with Section 525(1)D and 525(2)A of the Local Government Act, and Section 12.5, 3, 4, and 5 of Zoning Bylaw Number 1264, and as per the fees set forth in Fees and Charges Bylaw Number 2256, or B, a registered easement and S.219 covenant securing the provision of parking spaces on a property located within 300 meters of the use in which they serve in accordance with Section 525(1)C of the Local Government Act and Section 12.51 of Zoning Bylaw Number 1264, or C, a combination of the above, provided that a minimum of 1 space is addressed through cash in lieu.
Seconder for the motion, Councillor Charlotte. Any discussion on the motion on the table? Councillor Rind and Councillor Elliott.
I'm curious why the the provision there for the at least 1 space to be provided through cash in lieu. What's that about?
Through your worship, to provide some clarity to that, that is based on the provisions of the zoning bylaw, specifically Section 12.5. So Section 12.5 allows a covenant to be secured for off-street or off-site commercial parking spaces, but not for the residential parking spaces. So the applicant is providing 5 parking spaces. We've varied it from 8 to 6. There's still that 1 space where they have to do it through cash in lieu because the covenant option is only available to commercial spaces.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions on the motion on the table? Councillor Elliott?
I think it's just both these instances, these commercial buildings in our downtown core need to, they emphasize the need for our parking management plan to be more of a priority. We've got so many things we could become, and I think we're changing the way we move people in our town and the way we want to handle tourists in the future. Those things need to be addressed. We're maybe stifling commercial development because we're requiring parking that goes on, that's based on a bit dated way we live. So I think that strategy needs to be moved forward in our planning department world. And that's it.
Okay, thank you for your comment. Any further discussion on the motion on the table? All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Rind is
I'm sorry,
opposed.
I messed
Sorry.
up the first time.
Okay, Councillor Rind is opposed. Motion's carried with Elliott, Charlotte, and Sulz. Moving on to item 4. Someone want to put that on the table, please?
Okay.
Councillor Charlotte.
Sure. Thanks for the break, Jackie. Development permit DP 2019-21 be approved for form and character for a 9-unit mixed-use building located at 519 and 521 2nd Street West, Lot A, Section 34, Township 23, Range 2, west of the 6th Meridian, Plan EPP 95843, subject to the following preconditions to issuance being met. A, the applicant provide a security for the due and proper completion of landscaping in the amount of $86,693.75 to the city of Revelstoke in the form of cash or unconditional, irrevocable, auto-renewing letter of credit issued by a Canadian chartered bank or credit union. B, the owner shall enter into a housing agreement with the city in accordance with Section 483 of the Local Government Act for the one affordable rental housing unit, as the density is only permitted in accordance with Section 8122H of zoning bylaw number 1264 on the condition that 15% of the units is proposed to be used for affordable housing. And C, the deficiency of 5 on-site parking spaces, noting 12 spaces required with 7 shown on plans, be satisfactorily addressed through either variance or letter of intent to pay cash in lieu or provide off-site parking at time of building permit in accordance with the Local Government Act and city bylaws, all to the reasonable satisfaction of city staff, who may then sign and issue this permit.
Seconder for the motion. Councillor Elliott, any discussion on the motion on the table? It's pretty straightforward. It's bringing everything together, plus it's dealing with the security on the landscaping and dealing with the housing unit. So I don't see any further discussion on the motion. I will ask the question. All those in favor? Okay, motion's carried. Thank you. We are now almost 2 hours into this meeting. I just want to take a 5-minute break and then we're going to come back and carry on. Thank you. Probably everyone's going to have to restart their video. Am I just not seeing Councillor Elliott? Is he here and I'm the only one not seeing him, or? Oh, there you are,
He's there in
Rob.
the
You've put on a different color coat. Sorry, I see you. All right, thank you. Okay, so we're going to get started again with announcements from the mayor. So we're going into the long weekend, and I just want to basically state the same words that CSRD is saying. Right now, the best vacation is a staycation. So just encouraging people to stay at home and not travel so that we can carry out Dr. Henry's orders about staying in our region, staying in our area, so that we stay safe. I think now is the prudent thing. If we do that now this weekend, then maybe we will be home free as we move forward as far as the virus goes. So one of the questions that I have to the community is, what would inspire the community to feel safe as we start to reopen up? What will instill confidence in you, the community members, as our retail sector opens back up? And so I'm just encouraging you to send emails to me to let me know what you feel would make you feel safe as you enter into the downtown area, to go into stores, that sort of thing. So if you send those things, those comments to communication@revelstoke.ca, and I'll be able to see them, and staff and I can have a conversation, and council can have a conversation as to really what you feel is going to be safe and prudent as we move forward. Further to that, if there's any questions about the council meeting today, we're going to address some of these things on Thursday in my message, and just encourage you again to send your questions to communications@revelstoke.ca, and I'll be able to answer your questions. Again, as we go into the weekend, I just want everyone to be safe, healthy, and have a great Victoria Day long weekend. So we're just going to go back into our meeting package now and flip the page here, engineering, and there's some readings there. So we're going to do them independently and just go through them and go from there. Mr. Black is here if you have any questions. So the first one, someone want to put that on the table, please. Councillor Rind.
The third reading of well use regulation bylaw number 2260 be rescinded.
And I saw Councillor Elliott had raised his hand, so I'll get him to second it. Thank you. Any comments on that? These are basically wells that are in the Big Eddy area or in the community as a whole. But we're just taking the well use regulation and rescinding it at this point. Any further comments or questions from Mr. Black? Any comment, Mr. Black, before we vote on this?
No, Your Worship.
All right. So all in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Item number 2, someone want to put that on? Councillor Rind.
That well use regulation bylaw number 2260 be amended to acknowledge the Water Sustainability Act and Groundwater Protection Regulation as recommended by Interior Health Authority and the Ministry of Forests, Lands, Natural Resource Operations, and Rural Development.
Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Elliott. Discussion on the motion. Okay, this is again dealing with those wells. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to item number 3. Councillor Rind.
That well use regulation bylaw number 2260 be reread at third reading as amended.
Seconder for the motion. Any discussion, Councillor Charlotte, any discussion on the motion? Okay, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. That deals with the wells. Going on to 11A, staff reports. Community Economic Development Task Force. Someone want to put that on the table, please? Councillor Elliott. Councillor Elliott, if you could unmute, please. And you were halfway through the motion.
I do. That the establishment of an economic recovery task force in collaboration with the Columbia Shuswap Regional District Area B be supported.
Seconder for the motion, Councillor Charlotte. Any discussion on the motion? Ms. Braun is with us if you have any questions for her. Councillor Charlotte.
I just wanted to comment that I'm excited to see this come together. We got a lot of work to do. We need to support our community as best we can and the economic viability of the various different businesses, especially small business. I know for myself, the situation keeps changing so fast that trying to keep up with it, it's so much easier to do as a team and as a group. And this is a way that we can support. I look forward to hearing any recommendations that might come out of there of how the city can support the community. I know there's a lot of ideas that have been getting floated around on social media and in the news, but I want to hear it from the task force. It sounds like it's going to be well designed to bring a lot of different brains to the table and follow the best guidelines of our provincial health authorities. So I'm excited to see what comes up.
Great. Any further comment? All those in favor? Oh, Councillor Elliott, you had a question? Councillor Ryan?
Yeah, the community foundation is busy trying to raise funds for any emergency response or any needs that might be identified. So if Ingrid needs anything immediate, then there's a contact she can go to at the foundation.
Awesome, thank you. Councillor Ryan, did you have your hand up to ask a question?
Oh, well, I'll just add to that I think part of the biggest piece to that community foundation work is also identifying where the biggest areas of need are. So I think that will be largely come from the input from the task force, which is going to be great.
Yeah.
Ms. Braun, do you want to weigh in with any commentary before we vote?
No, just to comment that we are working closely with the Social Development Committee to make sure that the plan forward is coherent with their needs and issues. And we are bringing together, as has been mentioned, a wide group of stakeholders to participate in looking at best practices, looking at what would work best for Revelstoke and coming up with a made in Revelstoke solution.
Great, thank you for that. Well, I'm excited about this as we move forward. I think this is a great thing to have a task force in dealing with the economic recovery. It's well warranted and looking forward to that. Okay, I'll ask a question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to number 11A, or 11B, pardon me, Development Services. There's a presentation. Mr. Simon, are you going to do that presentation?
Yes, Your Worship, I am. Thank you. I will get that up right now. Okay, so this item is with respect to a development permit application for the Revelstoke Mountain Resort Phase 1 golf course clearing and grubbing application. So again, similar to the other ones, brief overview, start off with some background information, get right into the details of the proposal, followed by the policy direction, which in this case, it is kind of a complex policy framework. So if you guys have any questions after, please let us know, and conclude with the staff recommendation. So to give some background, the application does include 8 properties that are adjacent to Nickel, Camosi, and Airport Way. In total, it's approximately 348 acres of land. So it falls within 2 development permit areas, both the resort development permit area being Area H, as well as the environmentally sensitive and hazard lands development permit area J. It is Zone Comprehensive Development Zone 8, and the property is surrounded by residential and resort properties. So getting into the specifics of the proposal, Phase 1 does include securing the necessary environmental approvals to prepare the land for future development. So please bear in mind that this is an environmental development permit, so it's not a development permit for form and character. Phase 2 will be for the construction of the golf course and related amenities, and that will be dealt with through a separate application. On the lands, there's about 120 acres that are proposed to be cleared. And that parcel that's not shown on this picture, that's adjacent to Airport Way, is proposed to be used as a golf course training facility. So the development will be undertaken in the vicinity of Williamson Lake, as well as sensitive riparian areas, as shown on the slide here. The applicant has submitted a riparian area regulation report, as well as an environmental management plan, and you will see those appended to the associated development permit. These will guide the harvesting activities in accordance with all applicable provincial and federal legislation, and we'll get into that in a minute. And the activities all need to be overseen by a qualified environmental professional. So getting into the specifics, some of the lands around Williamson Lake, as you can see shown in red here, are sensitive environmental areas. And then the areas shown in orange, so here's the parcel on Airport Way. Those are areas that do contain steep slopes. So in accordance with the official community plan development permit area J policies, a development permit is required to address the environmental components of the application. So when we look at the development permit, again, they submitted an environmental management plan. This is kind of a key piece to this application that's going to guide not only the preliminary approvals, but all aspects of the timber harvesting process. So the plan includes provisions for soil and erosion control plans, any drainage implications associated with the clearing activities, fencing of sensitive lands, as well as provisions for when those fences will be removed so that they're not inhibiting wildlife movement. The impacts on wildlife corridors, as well as timber harvesting procedures, which include but not limited to control of invasive species, which is a key component, and then overall monitoring. So given the city doesn't have a qualified environmental professional in-house, one of the things that we've been working on for this application is working with Cascade Environmental to have them complete qualified environmental professional peer reviews of the plan, as well as the supporting documentation that was submitted with it. And they will assist the city in the overall monitoring of all harvesting activities. So moving into the policy direction, again, it gets a little bit complex for the policy framework on this. So if you guys have questions after, let us know. So looking at development permit area H to start, this is the resort land development permit area. What this area does in the guidelines is it says everything requires a development permit, and then it reverts back to Appendix 2 of the OCP, which is the overall plan for the Revelstoke Mountain Resort area. So when we look at Appendix 2, what are the key things that we want to pull out for council consideration here that really guide this development form? It's specifically going to be the principles contained in Section 4, and then the land use policy and directions contained in Section 5. So when we look at the principles in Section 4, they provide an overview of things such as managed and monitored growth to make sure the phasing and sequencing of the development is occurring at a sustained rate. Looking at providing for increased recreational and cultural opportunities, which the development of the golf course that has always been planned does contribute to that, as well as protection and enhancement of the natural environment. So those are some of the key principles we need to be mindful of when we're evaluating this application. So now when we move into Section 5 of that Appendix 2 of the OCP, this is what gives us our policy and our land use directions to guide the overall development. So this includes, policies pertaining to providing for an all-season destination resort so that it's known for more than just being the ski hill. Alternative development forms to contribute to that goal, so accommodating different recreational opportunities. And then natural environment enhancement measures, which are a big consideration in this section. So it includes things like minimizing impacts in the riparian areas, specifically the streamside protection enhancement areas, proper maintenance to prevent contamination of water courses. So that would be included within phase 2 of the application when they actually start constructing the golf course and related amenities. Adherence to all provincial regulations, which in particular riparian area regulation. That's a key provincial legislation piece that needs to be met, that is kind of downloaded to the local municipalities to ensure adherence to, and then application of best practices for environmental management. So to ensure that these policies are met, the applicant did submit again the riparian area regulation report, as well as the environmental management plan. So when we look at development permit area J policies, again, this is the environmentally sensitive area as well as the hazardous areas, very similar to what you're seeing in Appendix 2 of the OCP for the policies with respect to sensitive environmental areas. So again, the key here is that they have submitted an environmental management plan to try and mitigate as much as possible any impacts to the environment through the clearing activities. And again, just to reiterate, one of the key things is that all activities will be overseen by a qualified environmental professional. So getting into the staff recommendation here, staff does support the development permit and we do recommend it be approved. However, before the development permit is actually issued, which would allow the construction to occur, there are some key pieces that we need to make sure get captured before any clearing activities occur on the lands. So one of the first things is final acceptance of the riparian area regulation report that was submitted to the province. So if there's any changes that need to occur, the province would be in contact with the applicant and the local municipality to identify what those changes are. So we want to make sure that that gets signed off and gets clearance from the province. We also want to make sure that the application complies with the provincial legislation. And in particular, in this case, it'll be the Water Sustainability Act. So if there's any approvals that are required for crossing of a stream, so it's specific as to changes in and about a stream, those are regulated under Section 11 of the WSA, and we would need to secure approvals for that. So before doing any clearing activities, that has to occur. Due to the potential of destruction of fish habitat within Williamson Lake, we would need to make sure that any approvals as required by Fisheries Oceans Canada are provided. Staff are going to be working with the applicant to secure a Section 219 covenant, which will relate to monitoring of all activities and making sure that they're overseen by a designated environmental monitor. I will note that that environmental monitor can halt the operations at any point in time if they do feel that they aren't complying with the applicable legislation. The applicant will need to submit a site grading plan. Now, this is a requirement within the CD8 zone that prior to any land alteration, a site grading plan is provided. And then lastly, we would be looking for a revised environmental management plan if there are changes that are required due to the required provincial and federal reviews. So we want to make sure that whatever plans we append to the development permit are the most up-to-date plans and account for any changes that the province or federal government may have. Thank you. This concludes my presentation. Ms. Wade and I are available if you have questions.
Great. Thanks, Mr. Simon. So council members, I would like to put this on the table, reading right through to item F. Anything that's in a bracket, you don't need to read out verbally, but if someone could put this motion, all of these right through A to F, starting with a precursor, and then we will ask Mr. Simon and Ms. Wade any questions that we have. Oh, Ms. Lowe's waving her hand here. She's going to tell me we don't need to do something. You need to unmute.
I have good news. The resolution is actually on the screen so the public can see it, so it can just be
as in our package?
As presented on the screen, yeah. Okay,
awesome. Somebody gets a short one here. Who wants to do this one as presented on screen? Councillor Elliott, you raised your hand. Awesome.
The short one. So just all the subsections we can do as presented on screen. Is that correct?
Yeah, just do the first part, development permit be issued, and then as presented on screen.
Yeah. That development permit DP 21916 be issued for protection of the natural environment, its ecosystems and biological diversity for phase 1 of the Revelstoke Mountain Resort Golf Course, located on 8 properties IDs 12, 5.
You don't need to go through that. Just subject to the following
preconditions to issuance being met, and the stipulations are as on the screen.
Seconder for that motion, Councillor Rind. Okay, so any questions or comments of Mr. Simon as we move forward here? Councillor Charlotte.
Yeah, I did quite a bit of reading on this on the weekend. I was really curious to see what this was all going to look like. I'm pleased to see that Cascade Environmental seems to be the same environmental management or consulting company that we've used in the past with the city. So it seems like they're quite familiar with our areas and our sensitive areas. Is that correct?
Your worship, yes, that is correct.
Awesome. If I could follow up, I'm just curious as to what will monitoring look like as they're going through grubbing in this area?
Through your worship, so there will be an extensive monitoring plan, and it's actually embedded in the components of the environmental management plan that will be appended to the development permit. So there's going to be baseline monitoring that kind of looks at the current state of the land. There's going to be water quality control tests that are dug at different sections of the scope of the development. So looking at sensitive riparian areas, the mouth of Williamson Lake, to ensure that there's no downstream impacts associated with the harvesting activities. There's going to be reports at key milestones that will be presented back to the city. And again, the oversight with the monitoring will be done by the qualified environmental professional that RMR has retained, as well as a representative from Cascade Environmental. And the specifics of how that's actually going to play out would be established through that Section 219 covenant that we would register on title to make sure that it's enforceable.
That answer your question, Councillor? Any further comments or questions for Mr. Simon?
Just a
Go ahead, Councillor Elliott.
Just a quick commentary on the riparian regulation. You mentioned that it was downloaded onto the municipalities. Is that a new thing? I mean, typically the Ministry of Fisheries and Oceans, they deal with one. They're pretty, I guess, strict and diligent on their work. Now, is that just something that the city now just needs to be fed the information, or are we getting involved in it?
Through your worship to Councillor Elliott, so it is something that has been around for a little bit from my understanding of the BC legislation. Now, it's making sure that any local approvals account for the riparian area regulation. I will note that we still work in tandem with our provincial affiliates to make sure that the sequencing of approvals captures all of their requirements as well as ours. It does get to be a bit of a complex framework for these environmental approvals, but ensuring that all development abides by the riparian area regulation is the responsibility of the municipality. Hence why the city has found it necessary.
So, but the formulating the rules and the biological requirement. I'm sorry.
Through your worship, the riparian area regulation itself.
We don't get.
Sorry.
Yeah, I don't think we get involved in administering or deciding what's in that regulation. Is that correct?
That is correct. The province crafts the riparian area regulation, and we are required to abide by it.
Yeah, yeah. I just generally, I wouldn't want to create another obstruction or delay in the process. I mean, if it's being done once on the federal level or this provincial level, they just say, okay, we've done it, we met the standards, pass the information to the city, and then we can say, okay.
But through your worship, I will note that Ms. Wade was working on this with the applicant prior to me even coming to the city. Then I've been assisting with it since my time here, and we've been in close communication with the applicant owner, and they're well aware of what the requirements are, and we had made sure that they were cognizant of what these preconditions to issuance were, are already actively working on securing these approvals.
Great, thank you both. Any further comments or questions regarding the golf course? Seeing none, I'm going to ask the question with all the motions that are here. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. We're going to move on to item 3. Someone want to put that motion on the table? Councillor Elliott? Is this one on the screen too, Ms. Lowe?
No.
No, carry on.
That development permit DP 2020-05 be approved for form and character for the City Hall building located at 216 Mackenzie, lots 8 and 9, block 23, Township 23, range 2, west of the 6th Meridian, Kootenai District Plan, NEP 636A.
Seconder for that motion, Councillor Sherlett. Any discussion on the motion? That's dealing with refurbishing the outside of City Hall. I think I will note that this has been in the works for a long time. We've got some grant money and we're actually seeing some things come ahead and whatnot. But I see in my notes I have a presentation. So Mr. Simon, did I miss that part?
To your worship, we're able to give a presentation if it's required. I leave that up to council to decide. We have one ready, but I know it's been a long day with lots of presentations, and I think this is probably the simplest file that you guys have on your plate today.
Awesome. Does anyone need to know any more about the outside of City Hall? Ms. Lowe.
Your worship, I think it might be good for the public to see a little bit more detail about what that looks like.
Okay, she's giving a thumbs up. That means do the presentation. Thank you. Just need to find it.
Okay, there we go.
Awesome,
Thank
thank
you
you.
for your patience. Okay, so again, this is a development permit for the City Hall exterior rehabilitation project. I'm sure you guys have been familiar with it for a while. So start off with some background info again, get into the proposal, look at the policy direction, and conclude with the staff recommendation. You can see a nice rendering here of what the exterior finish will look like upon completion. So located at 216 Mackenzie Avenue, parcel's approximately 0.12 acres in size. Again, falls within development permit area B, being the downtown revitalization. And in this case, it's zoned central business district, surrounded by commercial properties. City Hall building was originally constructed in 1939. You can see from the photo here, it was constructed of concrete, but has since been altered over time and has been covered by stucco. So the current building is experiencing deterioration of the exterior finishes. In 2013, the city undertook a building envelope heritage assessment in partnership with a consultant. It was to look at how we could rehabilitate this iconic building. Exterior rehabilitation is required to provide critical maintenance for this institutional building now. Project includes selective demolition of cement stucco walls, rehabilitation of the original concrete surfaces, reconstruction of the main entranceway stairs, as well as removal and replacement of select window assemblies. Now, in terms of full restoration of the original concrete, that when staff and consultants did look at the current state of the building, that was deemed not to be feasible. Therefore, the exterior rehabilitation was the best option moving forward. So design features include the Oxford white exterior insulated finish system, which is reflective of the original City Hall design, and will have the reveal lines in there to give that block concrete look that is reflective of the original building. And this material also does help promote energy efficiency as well, which is a key component. There's black metal flashing along the roof line as shown in the picture here, and black gray trim around the windows. When we look at the policy direction and how we evaluate this type of application, again, we rely on the development permit area guidelines as identified in the OCP. So when we look at form and character, the exterior finishes we feel are sympathetic to the heritage elements of the historic City Hall. I know senior staff did have extensive consultation with the Revelstoke Museum and Archives curator to ensure that those historic design elements were incorporated as much as possible. And staff do feel that this is complementary to the existing streetscape along Mackenzie Avenue. And I can tell you, adjacent to the building, there has been some revitalization projects occurring, so this will fit in nicely. Surrounding properties are all zoned commercial, so there's no issues there. And when we look at site design, there are landscape features that are existing that will need to be removed during construction, and then they will be replaced upon completion. Parking and screening, there's not going to be any changes to the parking currently as it's shown, and there's no impact to garbage and recycling. We'll note that the City Hall is intended to remain open for staff, and there will be construction management plans that will identify exactly how access can be maintained. So concluding with the staff recommendation, we do recommend that this be approved for exterior rehabilitation to the City Hall building with respect to form and character as shown in the recommended resolution. Thank you. This concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Simon. Councillors, I'll ask again, any further comments? I personally am excited to see this going forward. I'm excited to see it kind of looking like it did back in 1939, or as close as we can with the products that we have to use now. I'm also happy with the energy efficiency. I sit in an office that is a greenhouse, and I'm hoping that refurbishing some of these windows will help, because I know in the winter energy goes out, in the summer energy comes in, and I'm sure that there are other parts of this building that the staff will be happy and the public will be supportive of that getting done. So I'm going to ask the question. All those in favor?
Sorry, Gary, just okay,
go ahead. Yeah.
You mentioned there's some grant money. Maybe the public might welcome that information.
They're disclosed at 200,000. Is that what we received?
Your Worship, as of today, we have received $200,000 grant from CBT Heritage Built Funding. So they thought it was a really good idea that we were going to rehabilitate this heritage building.
Right. Any further comments or questions?
I didn't see any parking space there in the revisions, but anyway, I'm quite happy to have it go.
We're parking in the city parking lot.
Okay.
All right, I'll ask the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to development services regarding Mackenzie Village. There's a presentation, Mr. Simon.
To your worship, I'll say it's Miss Wade.
Miss Wade. All right, there we are. I'm trying to find you on my screen. I see where you are now.
Thank you, Your Worship. There's no presentation of this, it's just a verbal. What you have before you is a request that the Director of Development Services be approved to accept the required financial security for landscape works previously required in DP 2017-15 at either subdivision or building permit stage. So Council had approved DP 2017 on September 10th, 2019. There was two conditions. One was for a parking covenant to be registered on title to deal with the Kootenai car sharing program. And the other was to have security of $675,616.50 for the landscaping works for phase 2 and 3. And those were the two conditions prior to issuance. The applicant has requested for consideration to move the landscaping requirements to the subdivision phase, which we are currently working on right now. There is a no build on the property currently, and there can be no building on it until the subdivision works and service agreement has been approved. And prior to that, letters of security for civil and landscaping works can be requested and are required. So staff feels that this is something they can support because we know that there are restrictions on title that will help us secure these landscaping works at subdivision or building permit. We are saying subdivision or building permit because there's going to be two subdivisions, one to create the lot that will hold phase 2 and 3, and then there's 4 buildings that will be built out. So we're proposing to work with the applicant in regards to the subdivision and how we will move forward with this, securing the works and the landscape works. So if you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Councilor Wren.
I'm confused why this motion is being made. I'm sorry. I like I read it, the report. I just don't understand what's different from when we passed the motion in 2019.
So through your worship, the difference is that it was a condition prior to issuance. And because council approved that, I have to bring it back to council because it's a significant amount of security and have this deferred to a later stage in the land use process, which we can do under section 502 of the Local Government Act. So that's why it's before you, because council has already approved this. And so now I need the ability to defer it to a subsequent land use stage.
And why wouldn't we accept it at the building permit stage if they have a no build covenant?
The no build is for subdivision. So it's associated with subdivision. So what happens is they're currently in the middle of their application for subdivision. As part of that, we review it internally and externally, and then we come up with a works and service agreement that will deal with civil and landscaping, both on and off site, and then that forms the agreement where security is taken.
Right, but it just seems like we're taking that deposit really early on for no particular reason, unless I'm missing something.
Well, I think they're moving, instead of us taking it now, we're moving it to the subdivision or building permit stage rather than taking it now. So we are deferring it for them so they don't have to come up with the money when they start talking about this.
Right, but why don't we just say building permit stage? Like what is the advantage to doing it at the subdivision phase?
So in their MDA that is registered on title, it lays that out, that there's to be no work on site until the subdivision is approved and the associated works and services agreement is is secured and the letter of credits are paid.
Okay.
We're giving him bonus time to get this money together. Is that correct?
Yes, we're deferring it to a later stage, and we feel secure about that because the no bill can't be lifted until the subdivision is approved and the letters of credits carried forward. Then we discharge the covenant, and then they can proceed into construction.
Okay. Any further questions, Councillor Ryan?
No.
Okay. Councillors, any other questions regarding this? Councillor Elliott?
Yeah, I just think that this is what we were talking about earlier when collecting the money at development permit stage as opposed to a little bit later in the process. It gives in this case, it gives the proponent a time to feel out the market, to understand if he's really going to commit to the project instead of having $700,000 tied up in limbo for a while. So I think it's a good move. I think it's great.
Great. All right. Thank you. Any further comments? All those in favor? Opposed? Oh, wait a minute. Sorry, Ms. LaRose, did I not get a seconder?
Thank you, Your Worship. I need a mover and a seconder, please.
Oh, we forgot that part. Okay. And Ms. Wade read the whole thing for us here. So I'm going to ask Councillor Ryan, could you just read it and then we'll get
That the Director of Development Services be approved to accept the required financial security for landscaping works previously required in DP 2017-15 at either the subdivision or building permit stage.
seconder for this motion, please. Councillor Elliott. All right, now I'll ask the question. Legally, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to Parks and Rec. Someone want to put this motion on the table? Councillor Elliott?
Nice and short one. That the 2020-2021 work plan for the youth liaison be approved.
The seconder for that motion, Councillor Rind. Ms. Donato is with us. If you want to ask any questions, any concerns, I think it's pretty extensive work plan and I'm quite pleased with that. Councillor Charlotte.
I just want to say thanks to this. I'm so proud of the youth liaison and the work they do, or that she does in our community. I think that almost every table I sit at, if not every single one, refers to touching base with her and making sure that the youth are represented in how we make decisions and moving our community forward. So it's amazing to see the detail that goes into this. You can tell we've had the same person in place for a while. That work is just getting stronger every year. It's amazing to see.
Great. Thank you for your comment. Any further comments or questions? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Going to move on to communications. There's a letter here from Tourism Revelstoke dealing with economic recovery strategy. Do you want to do anything with this letter? Do you have any questions with Ms. Braun regarding this letter, or how do you feel? Councillor Ryan?
Yeah, this is a great letter. I appreciate that there's lots of collaboration being done. They've put a lot of effort into thinking about the different stages, and it looks really, I don't know, thorough but also cautious, which is good. I also really appreciate that they mention their intent to partner with locals to come up with a plan when they do, reopen tourism, to make sure that it is a vision of tourism that also helps residents. So yeah, it's good.
Good. Ms. Braun, any comments?
Not at this time, sir.
All right, thank you. I'm appreciative of the work you're doing and the chamber and the tourism sector. And we're all trying to figure out how we move forward with economic recovery. So I think that's a good thing. Okay, so I'd like to move in camera. Pursuant to section 90.1G of the community charter. Is someone want to make that motion for me? Councillor Elliott, Councillor Charlotte, all those in favor? Thank you. We'll just take another couple